One, you live.
Well, welcome to the final evening of the International Leadership Dialogue Institute sessions. This one is particularly interesting to many of us, I think. The Abraham Accords, The Promise of a New Middle East is the title. It's exciting to me as the former Defence Minister in Australia, but also now as the chairman of the Australia United Arab Emirates Business Council. I was particularly astonished and excited and thrilled when the UAE normalized relations with Israel, as has Bahrain, and other Sunni Arab nations are looking to do the same thing. So we have gathered together. I'm only the moderator. Won't be presenting for the next 55 minutes, but we've been very fortunate to gather together Avi Dichter, who is the former minister in the Israeli government, of course, also the head of Shin Bet, Major General Amos Gilead, who's the executive director of the Institute for Policy and Strategy and chairman of the annual Herzliya Conference Series, but also for the first time in the Dialogue's history, which is now in its 12th year, we have two presenters from the Emirates, His Excellency Jamal Al Mushaddak, who's the Director of Policy Planning Department in the UAE Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, and also His Excellency Dr. Sultan Al Nuemi, who is the Director General of the Emirates Centre for Strategic Studies and Research. So I'm going to ask each of the presenters to present for a short period of time, maybe 4, 5, 6 minutes, on the subject of the Abraham Accords, the promise of a new Middle East and what it means. And then I might take the opportunity to ask a question or two myself as the moderator, and then Alan Howe, as has been the case all week, will moderate a questions period for about 20, 30 minutes for the second half of this session. So in no particular order, but just because of a former minister, I feel that I should give my former minister, the colleague, the first kickoff. I might ask Avi Dichter to speak first. Avi is currently the chairman of the Foreign Affairs and Defence Committee in the Knesset, but he was the Minister of Public Security, Home Front Defence, and the former director of Shin Bet, which would be known to everyone as the Israeli Security Agency. He took over during the Second Intifada in a particularly difficult time and calmed the country, and is very well known to the Dialogue as one of our very, very regular presenters. So Avi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Alberto Don, thank you for hosting another dialogue. It's really a unique one to do it by Zoom, but we are doing many things. We are Zooming our life during the last few months. And of course, good morning to my good friend Amos Gilad, and of course to our distinguished guests, أهلين جمال ومرحبا Sultan Muhammad. It's really a great pleasure to have such a dialogue about the Abraham Accords, which are really something new in our region, but mainly if we look backward to the last decade, how it started. So just to remind us that just 10 years ago, Egypt went through a revolution, and the Muslim Brotherhood took over. And then a military coup launched by Abdel Fattah al-Sisi returned, stabilized again the situation in Egypt. Libya crashed under Muammar Gaddafi, who got killed, murdered. Until today, it's a crashed country. Syria went through a bloodshed that more than 600,000 people got killed, 2 million got injured, and Syria 10 years ago was a country's 24 million people. Today, Syria is 17 million people. 7 million people became refugees outside the country, Syria, Turkey, Jordan, and other countries. And in all this mess in our region, suddenly, Dawlat al-Imarat al-Muttahida, the UAE, and Israel are running a peace treaty. It's amazing to see that in such a region, we are signing a peace treaty first one after 26 years since the peace accord with Jordan. We have an accord with the peace accord with Bahrain, Sudan, and hopefully warming relations and hopefully an agreement with Saudi Arabia and maybe some other countries like Oman, etc. I think that we have to take an opportunity to ask ourselves, why did it happen last year and not years before? We had the warm relations with the UAE. Israelis to travel over there, but it was all under the table. I think that what happened just a year and a bit ago is a great contribution, and it was a key factor to establish such Abraham Accords. And we have to thank Iran that September 14th, 2019, launched a strike against Saudi Arabia, against the Aramco sites, oil sites, destroyed 50% of the capacity of producing oil of Iran within less than an hour by 10 cruise missiles and 25 UAVs, unmanned vehicles, airplanes. And that's changed the traditional conception of all countries around us, including the UAE, that used to be, as they say in Arabic, "Ana wa akhuya ala ibn ammi wa ana wa ibn ammi al-gharib," which means me and my brother against our cousin, and me and my cousin against the strangers. And we used to be the strangers. I mean, Israel and all other countries who are not Arab countries. What happened since then is the fact that in these countries, including the UAE, they moved to a different conception that says, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And that's how we became officially a friend of the UAE, of Bahrain, and hopefully for some other countries. I think that the real warming of the Abraham Accords should be between the people and not just between the leadership. You know, in Quran al-Karim, it's written, وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا, which means we've made you peoples and the tribes to know each other. And I hope that it's going to be implemented on the ground. Just while we are talking here, I think that the number of Israelis who are today, this minute, in the UAE, mainly in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, are more than we have today in Australia and England. It's amazing to see how many people just moved there. But I think that more than that, in terms of economy, it's amazing the opportunity that we have. Opening the skies above Saudi Arabia and the UAE is going to build soon a direct flight to Australia. It's going to take about 15 hours. Albert, Chris, you know that we used to travel the whole day, 24 hours, by Hong Kong or any other country. Now we are going to do it direct. It's about 15 hours, like we are doing to Los Angeles. Above Sudan, it's going to enable us to open a direct flight from Israel to South America. That's amazing. You know, I myself, I'm a chairman of the Israeli Wealth Fund, who's supervising the fund that's going to invest outside the country. And I contacted a friend who is in charge of the funds in the UAE. He's the Secretary General over there. And to be honest, I was surprised. The UAE is the Wealth Fund has three funds, as a matter of fact. They invest $1 trillion overseas, $1 trillion. It's amazing. So I hope that some of those investments will be done here in Israel. And then, of course, the real test of the peace treaty will be how commerce and culture and tourism and so on will be developed between the countries. Last but not least, I must admit that when we are talking about the Iranian threat, it's a real threat. It's a real threat, and Amos was a very good expert on it for many, many decades. I'm sure he's going to elaborate on it. The Iranian threat is a real one. Just to remind you, 50 years ago, Syria was about to conquer Jordan. Israel blocked it. 1990, Iraq took over Kuwait within 3 days, and the United States came in to pull them back, but it was after all Kuwait was captured. I'm sure that we are all under real alert about what might happen, and we cannot count on miracles. Tonight, we are going to bench the first candle of Hanukkah. It's the Israeli holiday that is based on miracles that happened 2,100 years ago, before Islam, before Christianity. But the Abraham Accords is not a miracle. It's something real that was established and built by leaders for the people, by leaders in the UAE, the leader in Israel, the leader in the United States, and of course, the leader of Bahrain, the leader of Sudan, which means we need good leaders to build more and more Abraham Accords or Yitzhak Accords or Jacob Accords, etc., etc. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Avi. That's a great start, and I commend you on your the shortness of your presentation. It's great to give everybody a go, and it's my great pleasure to now ask His Excellency Jamal Al Musharraf to present. He's the Director of Policy Planning Department in the UAE Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but was also the youngest Deputy Permanent Representative of the UAE to the United Nations. He's worked in the European Affairs Department, the UAE Special Envoy to Afghanistan and Pakistan's office, the United Nations Department, and the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs Office. And he's also, interestingly, currently the co-lead of the Communications Working Group of the Global Coalition Against Daesh. So it's our great pleasure to have an Emirati representative today. And I would ask Jamal if you'd like to unmute and also present to us.
Thank you, Christopher. It's a pleasure to be part of this. And my warm greetings to Avi Amros and His Excellency Dr. Al Nuemi. I will try to be brief, more brief than Avi in my introduction and my reading of where we are right now. I just would like to put things into context, into a global context. This year has been one of the most difficult years for the entire globe in recent times in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. And it is during these times of uncertainty for the world that there was a need for a glimpse of hope in the region. And hope was not really a word associated with the region for the last couple of decades. As you know, the Middle East has witnessed a lot of protracted conflicts. And again, the perception of the Middle East was never a hopeful one. What this accord really presents is hope for a way forward, hope that even during a time of uncertainty in the world and the region, that countries such as Israel and the United Arab Emirates are able to commence bilateral relations, and that the region does have hope at peace and prosperity. And this concept really for the United Arab Emirates was a concept that did not occur overnight. Our concept of being a tolerant society, a society that is home to over 200 nationalities, we had, no one ever imagined that there would be a visit of the Pope to the UAE, let alone the Arabian Peninsula. So the visit of the Pope was very significant in that sense, to show this image of the region as a beacon for tolerance, really. In addition, Israel has been a member of IRENA that the UAE hosts. We also have the Abrahamic Family House in the UAE, which hosts the three religious sites of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. In addition, we do have a Jewish community in the United Arab Emirates. So it's very important that this message is conveyed really to the region and the rest of the world, that two countries that have lived in close proximity to each other for so many years are able to overcome the years of not speaking to each other directly, are able to understand each other's cultures, are able to exchange expertise, and be able to bring together economic forces to be able to move forward. We saw that expertise put at use in terms of combating COVID-19, for example, when two companies came together from Israel and the UAE to work really for the betterment of mankind. And in addition to this, really, for the UAE, the Palestinian cause remains at the forefront, really, of our foreign policy. We still support the cause as much as we supported in the past, and we will continue to do so. But it's really about this vision of hope that that the region should not be polarized from the rest of the world, that the region is a ground for prosperity, for peace, and that is really the message of this accord, that there is hope for peace. The words associated with the region need to be positive ones. The negative connotations of the many years of lack of dialogue and misunderstanding have not really come to fruition. And the ultimate really peace between the Israelis and Palestinians is really up to the Palestinians and the Israelis to be able to sit down and agree on a way forward. We obviously really value the role of the US in all of this. It has been of utmost importance. So I just want to close in my introduction really on this concept of hope, on this concept of changing the image of how the relations are run in the region. It's a really positive paradigm shift, and this momentum needs to keep going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. That's a terrific start. And our next presenter is Amos Gilad, Major General Gilad. He's the Executive Director of the Institute for Policy and Strategy at IDC Herzliya and is the Chairman of the Institute's annual Herzliya Conference. He was in the Defence Force for several decades. In the last 13, Amos was the Director of Policy and Political Military Affairs at the Ministry of Defence, where he managed Israel's international defence and political military relations and played a key role in developing Israel's defence relations with Sunni Arab nations and participated in several rounds of the peace process and negotiations with the Palestinians. So I think he will bring a particularly interesting perspective. And Major General Gilad, we look forward to hearing what you'd like to say.
Thank you very much. Sabah al-khair, sabah al-ful. Good to see you. Who could imagine we could talk together, all of us, directly. First, I would like to thank Avi Dichter for his compliments. I need to share with you, he is so humble. If someone in Israel deserves to have the Medal of Freedom, like United States, he is the one, because he saved Israel among few from the terror and what is called the Second Intifada, but it was terror attack on Israel, terror war. And I'll never forget how brave he was. He is, but he was at that time and effective. And he's really deserves all medals that we don't have in Israel. Thank you very much. Now I would like to share with you my vision about UAE. I was lucky to be involved in a very top secret security, defense, and other areas with UAE. Always I was impressed, and I'm impressed by the quality of UAE. It's unbelievable. Avi has described the potential. I would like to share with you a message. I do think that we need together with the leadership of UAE to extend the normalization to all Arab countries. You are like model. You are so brave, so courageous. And the peace, it seems to me it's a matter of 10 decades. It's so young, but you are the one we need to follow. And my impression is that UAE is not going to be involved in real efforts to convince Egypt and Jordan to normalize our relationship. Why it's so important? Because if the unique, fantastic peace between us and UAE will be only isolated or unique for our bilateral relationship, it's not enough. We need the giants like Jordan and Egypt. And today I need to share with you that the normalization does not exist. It's only a matter of formal, cold, superficial diplomatic relationship and underground security relationship. That's not healthy, because if one day political hurricane will visit us, we might be subject to dramatic changes. Now we are sharing the same threats. Iran is a real threat. It's nightmare that there will be another agreement that will enable Iran to develop, let's say in 10 or 15 years, the nuclear weapon. The nuclear weapon vis-a-vis Israel is existential threat, and vis-a-vis UAE, it's strategic threat. We need to defeat this threat. There are not even Arabs besides Shamkhani, that is a national security advisor or whatever it's called. But the whole leadership is determined to change the Middle East, to increase the influence, to weaken their world, and to get rid of Israel. We need to defeat this threat that is based on two circles. The nuclear weapon, we must prevent it together, and the regional. And the second one, not less important, is radical Islam. For me, it was dramatic personal trauma when I have seen President Sisi today, that used to be the Minister of Defense, and Qaid al-Amr al-Quwat al-Musalaha, namely General Commander of the Armed Forces of Egypt, with the rank of 4 stars, swearing to serve the Muslim brothers in Egypt. I will never forget it in all my life. And then he changed his mind and saved the whole Middle East. It was a matter of his decision. One day, he has decided to save the Middle East. I'm not exaggerating. I'm not talking about Israel. Can you imagine alliance between Egypt and Turkey, that they are like Muslim brothers? Turkey is a serious rival, if not enemy, to the existing order in the Middle East. We need to contain Turkey, to weaken it, and to hope and to do our best that it will be back like it used to be. Major pillar in the national security of the Middle East, within NATO, but within the Middle East. They are very dangerous. We need to not to forget them. I'm sure you don't forget them. So we do have a lot in common. But I do think that we need, first of all, with the leadership and the contribution of UAE, to extend the normalization. And I give you a small example that for us is big example. Why we need Qataris, that are Muslim brothers themselves, to sponsor Gaza. I prefer, there is a Harat Ben Zaid for Gaza. My dream is, I do have a dream that UAE will take the lead in Gaza. You have excellent relationship with Egypt, unbelievable. You need to convince them to normalize the relationship, even with joint venture with you, or in any way. Jordan, if something can change the Middle East, if the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan collapse, I haven't been so worried, and I'm very worried and concerned about the future of Jordan because of economic crisis, internal crisis, lack of normalization with us, besides security, unbelievable security cooperation. And UAE, based on my long experience with you, because you are so qualitative in UAE, you can contribute a lot and to take even the lead in spite of your size. Your size is small, but the quality is big. So my message to you is, please extend, beside what Avi Dichter has just described that is so important, we need your strategic role and contribution to lead the Middle East to different and new horizons. Thank you very much. Inshallah, Yasir B'khair. Shukran.
Well, Amos, that's a very big call, and I'm looking forward to hearing what our friends in the Emirates say about that. I must say they aren't that small. Their economy in the UAE is very large. So, like Australia, there's only 25 million of us, but our economy is very large. And in the Emirates, their population is not as big as 25 million, but their economy is very big. So they can make a big difference and have made a big difference and continue to. So our last presenter, before we move to some to and fro and questions and other comments, is His Excellency Dr. Sultan Al Nuemi. He's the Director General of the Emirates Centre for Strategic Studies and Research. He's also a lecturer at various UAE colleges, including the National Defence College and the UAE Joint Command and Staff College. He's fortunately an expert in Iranian affairs, and his thesis for his PhD was his political currents in Iran from 1979 to 2000, and in fact has a degree in Persian language and literature. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing what His Excellency wishes to say. Over to you.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for having me in this session with the distinguished panelists. Actually, I write some comments to participate in this session. And let me start when refer to the Abraham Accords, that namely the peace accord between Israel and the UAE. We would like to remember His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, the Vice President and Prime Minister of the UAE and rule of Dubai, when he said, history is written by men and peace is made by the brave. Therefore, the UAE step is a courageous and bold one, which His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan took at a sensitive time, characterized by settlement in the most serious area of conflict in the Middle East. Also continued a region of lands on which Palestinians could establish a viable state. Also ongoing use of the issue by terrorist groups exploiting the stalemate, and also increasing in employment among Palestinians and also Arab youth in general. A Palestinian divide matched by Israel obstinacy, if we can say so, leading to a great ambiguity over the issue. Therefore, the UAE made this decision with a robust understanding of the current situation. The decision is the result of efforts to find a solution and approach beyond the same old static and rigid methods. As a result, the roads to communication and peace now is open as we seek to settle unresolved regional issue, especially Palestinian case. Also, I recall the points made by His Highness Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed Al Nahyan, Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the International Corporation. He said that adopting dialogue would mitigate regional tension, promote interfaith tolerance, as is the case in the UAE, and lead to the economic cooperation from the Gulf to the Red Sea. The question is there is any immediate outcomes of Abraham Accords? The answer is yes, and that we can see it in, first of all, the Accords expose the powers and the groups who's looking for situation to remain unchanged. And this is very important for us. Also, the peace deal revealed the Palestinian leadership to the Palestinians, demonstrating the publicity rhetoric will achieve nothing. Dialogue is the only way to achieve Palestinian rights. The Israel realized that although the Abraham Accords are an opportunity for a great cooperation with the region, they require the Israel to fulfill obligation that confirm and promote a new perspective on the Middle East, helping to create a climate conducive to the issue of the Arab Peace Initiative. Now, if we are talking about the post-Abraham Accords, actually, to confront those who seeking to continue exploiting the Palestinian case, it is vitally important to highlight the positive outcomes the records. Yet the question is, have the accords begun to bear fruit? Yes, I think one of it that we are all together now. And also, we can see there is a changing in the Arab-Israel mood, mainly among the young generation who aspire to a better future. Also, a decline of policy rhetoric among the Palestinian leadership, and we can see now all of them return to the politic realism, which is paved the way for return to dialogue. Long time ago, we haven't seen that there is any communication between Hamas and the other parts of Palestinian, but now they are coming together. So this kind of accord encourage them to come back to the real way to find the solution for this case. A move toward more powerful outreach in the political and economic areas, gradually reaching popular levels, particularly with regards to culture and social aspects. And I would like to end up what I would like to participate here about prospects for Abraham Accords. As a result, the accords, there are indicators of promising perspectives of stability and development, fostered through the economy and knowledge spheres. These positive outcomes will mostly stem from continued political efforts, which will undoubtedly lead to meaningful action from both Israel and Palestine. In fact, this type of approach could promote minimum and optimism among adherents of dialogue and peace versus those who seek stalemate and terrorism. This is what we have to always thinking about it and concentrating, that this kind of Abraham Accords, it has to highlight on it. Always we have to emphasize that this kind of accords, it will bring peace. It will help the people in the region to bring peace. Is it this Abraham Accords, there is, let's say, groups and powers against it? Of course, yes. The question is, we have to ask them this question: why you are afraid of this kind of accords? Is it because that will damage your what you would like to do in the region? Is it will help the people to highlight to what this power, which is the powers and groups, which is useful for these people or not? I think Abraham Accords, and I totally agree with Amos Gilad that the UAE is a country which is, we can say it is the country which can be followed from other countries. The UAE will save no any efforts to do its efforts to bring the peace in the region. This accords, it's came for promote the peace and peaceful in the region. If there is any threat, we have to ask these countries or these groups why you are feeling that this kind of accord is threatening you. Is it because of what you are doing in the region? Is it okay, or is it against the peaceful in the region? So this is the question which I think we have to ask them to answer. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Sultan. And while Alan Howe organizes his questions, my first question to the panel is about the Palestinians, because the Palestinians immediately criticized the Abraham Accords. And my question to you is, do you sense there's any possibility that there is a party in the West Bank, and less so Gaza, that might actually use the Abraham Accords as an opportunity to change their direction and engage in the peace process meaningfully? From an Emirati point of view, were you disappointed that they didn't see it that way? And from an Israeli point of view, do you think there's a possibility that they might change their position and decide this is an opportunity for them to engage and use it as a circuit breaker in what at the moment seems to be an unfortunate cycle? Who'd like to go first?
With your permission, Chris, I will try to give an answer. The best way to look at it is to look at the Israeli side of this aspect, to remind us all that when the Abraham Accords was brought to the Israeli parliament, to the Knesset, so the only party who voted against it was the Israeli Arab Party. They voted against the agreement. It was not a surprise because the majority of the members of the Israeli parliament, the members of the Knesset in this party, they are affiliated with the Palestinian Authority. I would call them the Palestinian Authority ambassadors in Israel. And if they voted against it, it gives you a very good sight about the way that in the Palestinian Authority, they look at it in the West Bank. Up until 2007, we used to speak about a dialogue between Israel and the Palestinian Authority, whenever it was a dialogue. Since then, we have two Palestinian authorities. We have the West Bank under Mahmoud Abbas, and we have the Gaza Strip under Hamas superiority and supervision and control. And Mahmoud Abbas, his influence in the Gaza Strip, trust me, Chris, it's less than your influence on the Gaza Strip. So it means that, I heard very well my friend Nuemi, when he spoke about the Palestinian cause and about the hopefully ties that is being built between Hamas and the other faction, Fatah movement, and the Palestinian Authority in general. So I'm following it for many years, like my friend Amos Gilad. I remember every year or two, we had a kind of talks between Hamas and the other, and nothing came out of it. Because the distance is so far and the gap is so big that the only way that Hamas will be satisfied is to take over part of the control, if not all the control, in the West Bank. In Gaza Strip, they have 100% of control. Now, the UAE accord with Israel and the Bahrain accord with Israel and the war relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel and Oman with Israel and Sudan accord with Israel, it's sorry to say, it's a pain in the ass of the Palestinian Authority in general, and both factions, Fatah movement and Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Now, those proxies, I mean Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, they both are proxies of Iran, same as the Houthis in Yemen, who are attacking Saudi Arabia with long-range missiles on a weekly basis, same as Hezbollah in Lebanon. So I can't see any way that they and the Palestinian Authority will be satisfied with such an agreement that put the Palestinian aside. And to be honest, I think that the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian movement and the Palestinian terror activities like Hamas, like PIJ, they are frustrated. How come that after so many years that they were sure that Qatar is symbolizing the whole Gulf, suddenly they understand that there is Qatar on one hand and the UAE on the other hand. And the UAE is deciding to go forward while Qatar is looking backward. I think that they hope that some people believe that, or you just mentioned it, that maybe the UAE with Egypt will solve the Gaza Strip, which means they will demilitarize the Gaza Strip from military weapon, I'm afraid that Israel will win the World Cup in football before it will happen in Gaza Strip.
Well, that's not going to happen anytime soon, Avi. Although we have won the Eurovision Song Contest, so any other comments from members of the board? Who would like to comment on the issue about the Palestinians? Sultan?
Yes. I think that Mr. Ivy mentioned that unfortunately, if they are thinking like this is a big issue. If the Palestinian Authority and Hamas think that this kind of accords will put them on the side, this is a big issue. This is a misunderstanding of what the UAE would like to do. The UAE would like to pave the way for either Israel and Palestinian to find a solution for this issue. But if they are thinking like this and they think that the UAE will take over their step to token instead of them, this is, I think, it's a big issue. They have to come back again to thinking about it, to think about it in the right way. But I don't think that's the UAE way to put anybody on the side. If they are thinking like this, once again, I'm telling you that from the beginning, when the declaration of this accord happened, we've seen that a lot of people which is belong to our media, belong to the Brotherhoods or Hamas or Palestinian Authority, they attack UAE. But after that, I think Palestinians and the whole Arab region will understand that this kind of step that UAE taken, it is because we don't like to stay for murder for another years without doing anything. This is paved the way for the peace, paved the way for find a solution, and this is what I think our friend in Israel realize it, and I think the Palestinian has to understand that this kind of accords will happen, and it's happened, and maybe more accords might happen to find a way to come back to the table. And recently, what we've seen, some movement from Israel and Palestinian Authority. Let's say this is kind of reflect of this accords which happen in these days.
May I just give a slight remark to what just His Excellency Nuemi mentioned? You know, when people who are coming from countries who have a peace agreement with us, from Egypt, from Jordan, from Saudi Arabia, warming relations, from the UAE just recently, one of the best indication is when they come to visit the Temple Mount, Masjid al-Aqsa, al-Mubarak, holy places for Islam. Do you know that when they are coming to the Temple Mount, the Palestinians who are there, they are attacking them. They take them as people who are coming to do something who is against them and against Islam. Why against Islam? Because political reasons, not because of religious reasons. It gives you a really very strong feeling that something in the Palestinian Authority, when they trying to explain to the people, what do they mean with the UAE and Israel-Abraham Accords, or with a peace treaty with any other country? I remember even from Turkey, when we had good relations with Turkey and someone came to the Temple Mount, he was offended by Palestinians over there. So just give you a slight feeling about what we are talking about. Thank you very much, and sorry.
Well, I'd love to hear from Jamal and Amos on this question, but perhaps we can double back to it later on, because I'm sure Alan has questions too, and I'd like to get people having the opportunity to ask questions. We can always come back to that later on in the session. Alan, have we got any questions?
Yes, we have. Thank you, Christopher. For Jamal Al-Musharak, a few people are asking how important has been establishing relations between the UAE and the Holy See and Pope Francis' visit last year, and did that help make the Abraham Accords possible?
Thank you for that question. As I mentioned earlier, that visit was a very historic and monumental one. And it was really a visit aimed at placing the region as a beacon of tolerance in the region. Again, it's this concept of tolerance, this concept of accepting others, and also the concept of building on similarities rather than differences. Because if we do sit and look at the similarities, we'll realize that the similarities between us, between the United Arab Emirates and Israel, for example, are a lot more than the differences. And that visit really cemented the UAE and the region as a place that can be, as I mentioned, a beacon for tolerance and something that is against a concept demonized or a demonic concept such as extremism that, again, the region has been associated with. So it's this really counter rhetoric to the extremist rhetoric that has been prevalent in the region for so very long and has seen many different manifestations over the years and so forth. So it's this concept of tolerance that takes us forward to such steps as the Abrahamic Accord.
Also, on a similar point, Jamal, if I can, a couple of people are asking, is there universal acceptance of it, or is there some resistance within the UAE? And if there is resistance to the Accords, is it amongst younger people or older people?
Again, in terms of the global acceptance of the Accord, the reactions that we got were expected, whether they were the few reactions that were against it globally, but again, we also expected the enormous support globally for this accord, keeping in mind that the international community's agenda has the Middle East really on its mind when it comes to solving issues. So it's important to look at the large number of OIC countries that have supported it, Europe and so forth. There's a large number of countries that have supported. In the UAE, again, the UAE is a country, the UAE's people are people that have been brought up on the concept of tolerance, on the concept of accepting others. And this was really enshrined through the vision of our founder, the late Sheikh Zayed, peace be upon him, that the concept of tolerance, accepting others regardless of religion, regardless of race, is something that is part of the United Arab Emirates DNA. And there has been acceptance in the UAE for this accord. Obviously, the many years of lack of dialogue would never leave us to a way forward. So this is why we are very open-minded and accepting of this. It is within our DNA as a UAE society and as a country.
Thank you. Christopher, I've got a question for Amos. How might the normalization of relations between Israel and the UAE and Bahrain, and perhaps soon maybe Saudi Arabia, how might that change the hostility to Israel in the UN?
Sorry, where?
In the UN.
UAE?
No, United Nations.
Okay. I'm not thinking of the United Nations most of my life. I would like to relate first to the Palestinians. When I used to be in the intensive contact with our neighbors around us, I used to share with them the same message for a decade at least. The reconciliation, the feasibility of reconciliation is like a marriage between camel and donkey. No children could come out of it. Who is a camel? Who was a camel? Who is a camel? Who is a donkey? That's a top national security secret in Israel. What does it mean? It means that Hamas, Haraka Mukawama Islamiyah, they are extension of Muslim Brothers. They will never accept Israel, will never accept Palestinian Authority with the leadership of Abu Mazen, and they keep preaching to violence and terror. They are doing it. We don't hear about terror mainly because of today of unique success of Shin Bet and the other organs, but 500 times they are trying to do it, less or more. So today there is split between Hamastan and Abu Mazistan. Abu Mazen, unfortunately for him, he is not so young as he used to be. And his end is closer than his beginning. It means he might disappear or may disappear in a moment. And who will be the successor? There are many successors. I don't want to go to the details unless you are interested. However, I'm not optimistic about the feasibility of real normalization between us and the Palestinians. What we can do now, two things. First of all, we need to stabilize the situation in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria. I'm not sure that Avi will agree with me, but I'm so happy that the annexation plan has collapsed, mainly due to UAE. I think you saved us from direct confrontation between us and the Palestinians and Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. That could be security, severe security danger to Israel. And there is no logic behind it. I don't have time to elaborate it. But what we need, that's my lesson, we need to stabilize the relationship. Can we do much more? Frankly, without unique intervention or cooperation between us, UAE, Egypt, Jordan, to convince the Palestinians, it will not work. Maybe it will never work, because there are too many gaps. My nightmare is that Hamas' vision to extend to West Bank, to take over, will materialize based on weakness of the West Bank, because the West Bank leadership, there is no one leader. There is Dakhlan that living now in UAE, there is Mahmoud Alul, Rajoub, there are too many. Zaid Bassal, Kul Wahad Ras. I mean, too many leaders and no leadership. And that's the time, it's urgent to intervene in this issue. About UN normalization, I don't know, don't take it personally. I'm not so much concerned about UN. I think practically we are more welcomed in the world against the image. I remember, for example, India, 1.3 billion people. When I began my activities there, it was 10 years ago, I was welcomed by institutes that used to ask me when Israel dissolves or get all Palestinian refugees and give up allegedly nuclear weapon. It was so hostile. Today, it's unbelievable change. In China, they are not our allies, but of course they are like friends. I'm not talking about US, I'm not talking about security cooperation between us and leading European countries. I can name them. The United Nations as organization, I have never been impressed by them. I'm not sure we need to invest so much in getting popularity there. We need to do it bilaterally. That's much more important. So my message to you again and again, if you, and it's worthy to discuss it. What can we do together besides the bilateral cooperation that it seems to me like miracle between us and UAE? UAE is so qualitative, and Egypt is dunya, like they say. Together we can do a lot. We are doing it now, far away from what is needed. Thank you.
Christopher, we still have time for another question?
Well, I don't know if we do actually. I know I've got questions, and I think you probably got questions too. But I think we finish in about 2 minutes, and I know that Albert is a stickler for the timing. We started on time, so I think I'll have to take that opportunity to apologize to our interlocutors who would like to ask questions. I wanted to ask about Saudi Arabia. We'll have to do it all again next year in Jerusalem. I would like to thank Avi Dikta, Jamal Al-Musharak, of course, Sultan Al Nuemi, and Amos Gilad very much for joining the dialogue this year. I'd also like to thank Albert for making sure that we didn't miss this opportunity to have another dialogue, our 12th year of dialogue. Its longevity is also part of its success, but the most important reason it succeeds is because of the quality of the people that present and the quality of the interesting debate and discussion that has been had. So thank you very much, gentlemen. And I look forward to the next session.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much. As you say in Hebrew, לשנה הבאה בירושלים, next year in Jerusalem, שנה جاية في القدس, ירושלים. Thank you very much.
Inshallah. Shukran.
Thank you.
תודה. שלום.